The Drowned Crown. The document you are listening to is classified as Level 4 secret. Unauthorized distribution, transcription, or verbal repetition of any phrase contained within this recording will result in immediate termination of your security clearance, placement under TIPA amnestic protocols, or reassignment to containment maintenance at Site 19. This is the definitive briefing for item number SCP-6803. Object Class, Keter. Description, The Drowned Crown. Department of Tactical Theology File 88 Beta. Listen closely. Memorize the parameters. The entity you are about to understand thrives on the very concept of being known, yet its containment relies entirely on our ability to precisely calculate the geometry of its cage. Section 1. The nature of the lacustrine anomalous zone. SCP-6803 is not an entity that arrived from the stars, nor is it a manifestation of a localized reality fracture born from a failed laboratory experiment. It is a geographical and theological wound. At its surface level, looking down from a standard Foundation reconnaissance satellite or through the lens of a high-altitude drone, SCP-6803 presents itself as a freshwater lake. It measures approximately 11 kilometers in diameter across its widest axis. It is situated in a high-altitude, mountainous basin within a heavily redacted, remote territory, a place where the jagged teeth of the earth rise up to isolate the water from the natural flow of human migration. During the standard hours of local daylight, from the precise moment the sun's upper limb clears the eastern peaks until its final glint vanishes beneath the western ridge, SCP-6803 remains largely dormant. If you were to stand upon its shores at noon, you would see nothing more than an unusually clear, unusually still body of water. The surface tension is normal. The chemical composition matches standard alpine runoff, save for a negligible increase in heavy mineral particulates and a complete absence of local aquatic microfauna. There are no fish in SCP-6803. There are no weeds. There are no insects dancing across the shallows. The water is dead, but it is calm. The only physical sign that something is amiss during the day is a series of minor, almost imperceptible spatial distortions visible beneath the surface. If an observer looks straight down through the crystalline water into the deeper trenches, the light does not refract according to the standard laws of physics. The bottom of the lake appears closer than it is, then suddenly drops away into an abyssal depth that defies optical measurement. Sonar pulses sent through the water during daylight hours return conflicting data. One moment the lake bed is registered at 40 meters. The next, the signal continues downward for kilometers, echoing back from a space that cannot logically exist within the crust of the Earth. But these daylight deviations are minor. They are the quiet breathing of a sleeping giant. The true, anomalous nature of SCP-6803 manifests exclusively between local sunset and local sunrise. As the light fades, the lake undergoes a profound shift. The water changes from a transparent blue-green to a thick, light-absorbent black that reflects neither the stars nor the moon. The spatial distortions beneath the surface stabilize into a singular, permanent gateway. And it is during these hours of darkness that SCP-6803 begins to sing. The lake generates a continuous, wide-spectrum memetic compulsive signal. This is not an acoustic wave that can be blocked by traditional ear protection or soundproof barriers. It is a psychic, thaumaturgical transmission that interacts directly with the human temporal lobe and the deeper, subconscious layers of the human psyche. We have tried utilizing active noise-canceling technology, heavy lead-lined helmets, and localized telepathic dampeners. None of them have proven entirely effective. The signal does not enter through the ears. It enters through the mind's innate desire for order, for comfort, and for reunion. When a human subject falls within the active radius of this signal, they do not hear an alien voice or a terrifying roar. The signal masks itself as the most comforting, most desperately desired sound unique to that specific individual. For a subject who has lost a child, the signal becomes the laughter of that child echoing across the water. For an individual raised in a strict religious tradition, it manifests as the swelling chorus of a celestial choir, chanting liturgies in languages long forgotten by modern man. For the lonely, it is the voice of a long-dead spouse calling them home. For the ambitious, it is a low, reverent whisper promising secrets of absolute power, hidden knowledge, and eternal significance. It is a custom-tailored hook, designed to slide perfectly into the specific emotional or psychological void of whoever receives it. We call this the siren effect of SCP-6803, but it is far more insidious than the myths of old. The compulsion does not cause immediate madness or frantic, screaming hysteria. Instead, it induces a state of profound, peaceful certainty. An affected individual will stop whatever they are doing. They will leave their homes, exit their vehicles, or walk away from their posts. If they are driving, they will turn toward the coordinates of the lake. If they are on foot, they will begin a steady, untiring march toward the shoreline. They do not speak. They do not exhibit signs of panic. If questioned by loved ones or Foundation personnel before they reach the exclusion zone, they will express a calm, unshakable belief that they are simply going home, or that the king has called an assembly. If an affected individual is allowed to reach the shoreline of SCP-6803, the final phase of the initial attraction occurs. They do not hesitate. They do not strip off their clothes or prepare to swim. They step into the freezing black water fully clothed. And then they walk. They do not float. They do not sink like stones. They step onto the surface of the lake bed and continue their forward march, descending deeper and deeper into the dark. Our underwater cameras have captured this process before the pressure and the spatial distortions destroyed the equipment. The subjects do not gasp for air. They do not choke. Their lungs do not fill with water. As soon as their heads submerge completely beneath the surface of SCP-6803, their biology shifts. They cease to require oxygen from the atmosphere. They do not freeze in the sub-zero temperatures of the deep trenches. They simply continue to walk down the sloping underwater cliffs, moving with a steady, rhythmic pace, until they pass through the spatial threshold at the bottom of the lake. They are not dying. They are immigrating. They are passing out of our baseline reality and entering SCP-6803-1. Section 2. The geometry of the city beneath the water. Where do they go? They enter an environment that our anomalous geographers and spatial topologists have designated SCP-6803-1. Among the thousands of civilians and recovered Foundation personnel who have spent time within this realm, it is universally referred to by a single name, the city beneath the water. SCP-6803-1 is not a cavern. It is not an underwater cave system, nor is it a sunken ruin like Atlantis. It is an entirely separate, self-contained extra-dimensional space that exists in a non-Euclidean relationship with the lake above it. The total volume of the city vastly exceeds the physical dimensions of the lake basin. In fact, our mathematical models suggest that the internal space of SCP-6803-1 is functionally infinite, or at least capable of expanding without any observable physical boundary. When an individual passes through the threshold at the bottom of the lake, they do not find themselves floating in water. They step out onto dry, solid pavement. They look up, and there is no sky, only an immense vaulted expanse of deep, shimmering blue-black liquid held aloft by an invisible atmospheric pressure. The lake forms the ceiling of the city, miles above the rooftops, glowing with a faint, bioluminescent luminescence that provides a permanent, twilight illumination to the streets below. The architecture of SCP-6803-1 is its most terrifying characteristic. It does not possess a fixed form. It is a fluid, living urban ecosystem that rearranges its structural layout constantly. A street that runs north to south on a Tuesday may curve sharply to the west on a Wednesday, leading to an entirely different district that did not exist 24 hours prior. A grand boulevard lined with towering marble columns can shrink into a narrow, cobblestone alleyway over the course of a single night. Buildings appear and disappear without warning. An exploration team might set up a temporary base camp inside an abandoned three-story brick tenement, only to wake up 6 hours later inside the grand rotunda of a Gothic cathedral or the sterile, steel corridor of an industrialized megafactory. Because of this constant mutability, all attempts to map SCP-6803-1 have failed. Cartographic data collected by Foundation drones or manned expeditions becomes completely obsolete within hours of its recording. No two exploration teams have ever reported the same layout, the same landmarks, or the same distances between key points. The city is a labyrinth where the walls are constantly sliding into new configurations. Furthermore, historical records and artifacts recovered from within the city exhibit a form of temporal and conceptual instability. If a researcher recovers a handwritten diary from a house within SCP-6803-1 and brings it back to the surface for analysis, the text within the diary will alter itself. The names of the individuals mentioned, the dates of the events recorded, and even the language in which it was written will shift to match whatever historical narrative is currently dominant within the city at the moment of examination. It is as if the past itself is a fluid resource inside the city, constantly being rewritten to serve a contemporary purpose. Despite this architectural and historical chaos, the city supports a massive, permanent population. This population does not grow through biological reproduction. Our medical examinations of individuals within the city have confirmed that while they retain their reproductive organs, the natural processes of conception and birth are entirely absent within SCP-6803-1. There are no infants born in the city. There are no maternity wards. Yet the population fluctuates by thousands of residents every week. Where do they come from? They are the lost. They are the individuals pulled in by the nightly memetic lure from all across the globe. They are the missing persons whose names fill the databases of civilian law enforcement agencies worldwide. They are the souls who walked into the water and found a place where they felt they finally belonged. Our sociologists and anomalous psychologists have spent years analyzing the accounts of the few subjects we have successfully extracted from SCP-6803-1. Through their testimonies, we have discovered the underlying mechanism behind the city's shifting architecture. SCP-6803-1 is an empathetic mirror. It actively modifies its physical structure according to the collective beliefs, desires, memories, and expectations of its current inhabitants. If a large group of individuals who share a common cultural background or a shared historical trauma enter the city, an entire district will rise from the pavement to reflect that background. If the population is dominated by those who long for a return to a simpler, agrarian past, the city will manifest vast sectors of ancient stone metropolises, complete with aqueducts, open-air markets, and hand-carved temples. If the incoming population is traumatized by the cold, metallic nature of modern industrial capitalism, the city will generate endless blocks of factory complexes, powered by impossible steam machinery and roaring furnaces that produce nothing but noise and smoke. It can become an endless palace complex of glittering gold and polished mirrors for those who seek luxury. It can become a soaring, sterile modern megacity of glass skyscrapers and neon lights for those who fear the decay of progress. It can become a grim, defensive holy city surrounded by massive battlements for those who spend their lives in spiritual warfare. It is everything to everyone, a physical manifestation of humanity's collective subconscious desires, hardened into stone, wood, and iron beneath the weight of a silent sea. Yet amidst all this change, there is one absolute constant. There is one geographic feature that never shifts, never vanishes, and never alters its position relative to the rest of the expanding city. At the absolute mathematical center of SCP-6803-1, regardless of whether the surrounding streets are made of dirt, cobblestone, or asphalt, there exists an immense plaza known as the Throne District. It is the anchor of the realm. Every street, no matter how winding or non-Euclidean, eventually leads to this district if an individual walks with the intention of finding it. And at the heart of the Throne District, inside a structure that alters its exterior appearance but always retains its internal dimensions, sits the master of the city. Section 3. The Sovereign of the Depths. The entity designated SCP-6803-2 is the central intelligence, the governing authority, and the ontological engine of the entire anomalous system. Within the city, the residents do not refer to him by an alphanumeric designation. They speak of him with a terrifying, unforced reverence. They call him the Drowned King. They call him the Eternal Sovereign. To the older residents, he is the first below. To those who have lost themselves entirely to the city's spiritual ecosystem, he is simply the god beneath. SCP-6803-2 always presents itself as a humanoid male of advanced age. He does not hide behind a monstrous form or a shifting cloud of light. He chooses to appear as an old man, seated upon a massive throne constructed from an unknown monolithic black material that resembles wet, polished river stone. The throne itself is cold to the touch and constantly secretes a thin film of moisture that smells faintly of salt and ancient silt. While his physical features can vary slightly depending on the expectations of the person looking at him, appearing more grandfatherly to the frightened, and more stern and imposing to the defiant, there are several physical characteristics that remain absolutely static across all recorded observations. First, he wears a crown. This is not a crown made of gold, silver, or precious gemstones. The drowned crown is a living, writhing mass composed of moving aquatic organisms. Small, translucent crustaceans, blind deep-sea worms, and fragments of bioluminescent coral are interwoven into a circular wreath that rests upon his silver hair. The organisms do not die. They shift and crawl across his brow in a slow, hypnotic dance, their tiny legs and tendrils clicking against his skull. Second, his clothing is permanently waterlogged. He wears heavy, ornate robes that appear to have been woven from fine silk or ceremonial wool, but they are completely saturated with water. Streams of dark moisture constantly drip from his sleeves, his hem, and his lapels, pooling around the base of the stone throne. If you stand near him, you can hear the heavy, sodden squelch of his garments every time he shifts his weight. The water never dries. It never drains away. Third, his eyes do not possess human irises or pupils. They are solid orbits that emit a pale, steady blue light. This light is bright enough to cast long shadows across the floor of the throne room, and those who have looked directly into his gaze report a sensation of immense, crushing pressure behind their temples, a feeling that has been compared to diving deep into an ocean trench without a diving suit. Finally, SCP-6803-2 possesses no detectable heartbeat. When our medical officers and tactical agents have been close enough to utilize directional stethoscopes or bioscanners, they have confirmed that there is no pulse within his wrists, no movement within his chest, and no respiration occurring within his lungs. He does not breathe. His blood does not pump. He is biologically dead by every metric known to modern medicine. Yet he speaks, he moves, and he exercises an absolute authority over the reality of his domain. During our few successful interviews with SCP-6803-2, the entity has consistently claimed to be a primordial deity. He speaks with a slow, resonant cadence that seems to bypass the audio recorders and echo directly inside the skull of the listener. He claims that he is responsible for humanity's creation, that he carved the first human souls out of the clay of the deep ocean bed before the dry land ever rose above the waves. He claims that the history of the surface world is a brief, tragic deviation, a mistake born of mankind's foolish desire to live under a burning sun that will eventually consume them. He insists that every city built on the surface is destined to fall, destined to drown, and that he is simply maintaining a sanctuary for his children to return to when the end comes. The Foundation's Department of Tactical Theology has spent decades cross-referencing these claims with every known religious text, anomalous scripture, and prehistoric tablet recovered from archaeological sites across the globe. We have found absolutely nothing to substantiate his narrative. In fact, the theological texts found within SCP-6803-1 itself are a chaotic mess of contradictions. A holy book recovered from a temple in the Western District will claim the king was born from a teardrop of the moon. A scroll recovered from the Eastern District a week later will claim he created the moon with a flick of his finger. The texts are constantly rewriting themselves to support whatever political or spiritual narrative SCP-6803-2 is currently promoting to his citizens. Because of this complete lack of ontological consistency, the Department of Tactical Theology has officially classified SCP-6803-2 as a probable false divinity. He is not a true creator God. He is not an eternal pillar of the cosmos. He is a reality bender of extraordinary power who has constructed an elaborate, divine persona to justify his dominion and satisfy his need for absolute control. Section 4. The Mechanics of False Divinity. But do not let the label of false divinity cause you to underestimate him. The supernatural capabilities of SCP-6803-2 are vast, expanding, and currently unchecked by any standard reality stabilization technology we possess. The Drowned King exercises a form of absolute, localized reality alteration within the boundaries of SCP-6803-1. He can create matter out of nothingness. We have witnessed him wave a waterlogged hand and cause a feast for 5,000 people to manifest on bare stone tables, or cause a towering fortress to erupt from the pavement to crush a pocket of resistance. He can alter biology with a glance, transforming a rebellious citizen into a mindless, aquatic servant, or restoring a mangled, diseased body to perfect health in an instant. He is capable of instantaneous teleportation anywhere within his realm, and he can manipulate the local passage of time. Exploration teams have reported spending what felt like 3 hours inside the Throne District, only to return to the surface and find that 3 weeks had passed in baseline reality. Conversely, an agent can be lost in the city for what feels like a lifetime, only to be recovered and find that they have not aged a single day since they stepped into the lake. Perhaps his most terrifying power is the resurrection of the deceased. If a resident of the city dies, whether from an accident, an altercation with another resident, or during a Foundation extraction operation, SCP-6803-2 can simply recall their consciousness from the void. The deceased individual will reform from the moisture in the air, stepping out of the shadows of the Throne District with their memories intact, their wounds healed, and their loyalty to the king permanently reinforced. He can manipulate the artificial weather beneath the water ceiling, causing violent storms of freezing rain to fall from the liquid sky, or generating bursts of high-level thaumaturgic energy equivalent to the output of a Class 4 reality-bending entity. And our researchers have documented a deeply disturbing trend. His collection of abilities is growing. New anomalies continue to manifest within his repertoire every year. He is learning. He is evolving. He is expanding his reach. How is this possible? How does a false divinity acquire the powers of a true God? The answer lies in a discovery made by our Statistical Analysis Division following a series of long-term observation cycles. There is a direct, quantifiable correlation between the total population of SCP-6803-1 and the magnitude of SCP-6803-2's power. The relationship is not spiritual or symbolic. It is thermodynamic. The drowned king is a memetic parasitic entity that feeds upon the collective consciousness, the belief, and the physical presence of human beings. Every human soul that resides within the city acts as a battery, a localized anchor that stabilizes his existence and fuels his anomalous capabilities. When the population of the city is high, exceeding 70,000 or 80,000 residents, the king's power reaches its zenith. His reality-altering capacity becomes instantaneous and effortless. His physical durability increases to the point where high-explosive ordnance and heavy thaumaturgic strikes do not even leave a mark on his waterlogged robes. His control over the shifting architecture of the city becomes absolute, allowing him to rearrange entire square kilometers of urban landscape with a single thought. Most importantly, a high population increases the strength and clarity of the compulsive signal generated by the lake above. The stronger he is, the more seductive his song becomes, drawing in more residents to further increase his power in a self-sustaining, exponential feedback loop. Conversely, a decline in the city's population results in a measurable, immediate weakening of his abilities. This is the vulnerability we have sought to exploit, though the consequences of doing so have proven catastrophic. Our data indicates that when population losses within SCP-6803-1 exceed approximately 10%, the king begins to demonstrate signs of physical and operational deterioration. The pale blue light in his eyes dims. His voice loses its resonant psychic echo, forcing him to speak with the cracked, raspy voice of a mortal old man. The architecture of the city becomes sluggish in its movements. Buildings take days to rearrange rather than minutes, and cracks begin to appear in the stone foundations of the newer districts. If the population losses exceed 40%, the deterioration becomes severe. Witnesses from our deep cover espionage assets within the city have reported seeing the king look visibly older. His silver hair falls out in clumps. His skin becomes translucent and wrinkled, clinging tightly to his bones. He loses the ability to alter reality on a grand scale. He cannot manifest objects out of thin air, and he can no longer teleport across the city. He is forced to walk from place to place, leaning heavily on a staff made of rotted driftwood. He experiences prolonged periods of deep, unresponsive unconsciousness, slumbering on his wet throne for days at a time, while the peripheral districts of his city crumble into dust and ruin around him. Yet despite this profound degradation, SCP-6803-2 has never been observed dying. He cannot be starved out completely. He cannot be reduced to zero, because he has a secondary defensive mechanism built into his very nature, a phenomenon we call the influence radius phenomenon. An inverse relationship exists between the current population of SCP-6803-1 and the geographic range of the lake's memetic lore. When the city is full, prosperous, and teeming with tens of thousands of worshipful subjects, the king is satisfied. His energy requirements are met. During these periods, the compulsive signal generated by SCP-6803 is contained to a relatively small area, extending only 5 to 15 kilometers from the physical shoreline of the lake. This is a manageable radius, easily covered by our standard exclusion zones and physical checkpoints. But when the population decreases, when the Foundation manages to extract a large group of residents, or when an internal plague or conflict thins the ranks of his subjects, the king's energy supply drops. He enters a state of starvation, and in response to this starvation, his unconscious survival instinct kicks in. The compulsive signal doesn't weaken, it expands. The less power he has internally, the more violently he throws his net out into the surface world to drag in replacements. The greatest recorded range of this phenomenon occurred following the events of Incident 6803 Delta. During that operation, a coordinated, multi-theater strike by Foundation tactical teams succeeded in evacuating a massive portion of the city's inhabitants. We thought we had broken him. We thought we had reduced his population past the point of recovery. We were wrong. As the city's population plummeted by over 70%, the king collapsed into a near comatose state on his throne. But the lake above him went wild. The memetic lure expanded from its standard 15-kilometer boundary, blowing past our outer monitoring stations, past our physical blockades, and sweeping across the surrounding countryside like a silent, invisible shockwave. At its peak during that incident, the active radius of SCP-6803's compulsion reached an astonishing 241 kilometers, 150 miles in every direction from the center of the lake. It swept over multiple major civilian settlements, small towns, and rural communities. Thousands of people who had never heard of the lake, who had no connection to the anomaly, suddenly woke up in the middle of the night, stepped out of their beds, and began walking down the highways toward the mountains. They abandoned their farms, their businesses, and their children. They walked until their shoes wore through, and then they walked on bleeding feet, pulled by a desperate, irresistible need to reach the water. This is the trap of SCP-6803. We cannot destroy him by removing his people, because the act of removing his people turns him into a geographic black hole that sucks in the surrounding population of the Earth to stabilize itself. He is a parasite that has successfully tied its survival to our restraint. Section 5. Exploration Log 6803-12. To truly understand the operational reality of dealing with SCP-6803-2, you must hear the record of Mobile Task Force Mu-13, the Deep End. Mu-13 is a specialized unit comprised entirely of personnel who have undergone rigorous counter-memetic training, high-level psychological screening, and thaumaturgic shielding operations. They are our premier deep aquatic and extra-dimensional reconnaissance team. Their objective during Expedition 6803-12 was simple: breach the Throne District, establish direct verbal contact with SCP-6803-2, and utilize a newly developed reality stability sensor array to measure the exact density of his ontological anchoring field. The expedition commenced at exactly 0000 local time. The team, consisting of 8 heavily armed and equipped agents led by Agent Russo, entered the lake through a submersible launch platform stationed at the northern perimeter. They bypassed the standard spatial transition zone without incident, stepping out of the watery threshold and onto the dry, paved streets of SCP-6803-1. The following is the verbatim audio and telemetry transcript recovered from that mission. Timestamp 0000. Agent Russo, look up. Visual confirmation on the celestial ceiling. Liquid barrier is holding at approximately 3 kilometers above our current elevation. Luminosity is low, matching previous twilight baseline reports. The city, it's shifted again. It looks like a massive coastal metropolis this time. I'm seeing architecture that resembles late 19th century London mixed with modern industrial concrete structures. Gas lamps are floating in midair about 10 meters off the ground, casting a green glow. Agent Vance, copy that lead. My sensors are picking up heavy biosignatures in the immediate vicinity. The streets are crowded. Agent Russo, ignore the residents unless they impede movement. Keep your eyes forward, hoods down, counter-memetic filters active. We are here for the center. Advance toward the center. The team began their march through the shifting streets. The population at the time was estimated to be exceptionally high, approximately 70,000 individuals. The residents did not attack the team. They simply stood on the sidewalks, dressed in a bizarre mixture of historical garments and modern civilian clothing, watching the heavily armed Foundation agents pass with an expression of quiet, pitying amusement. Timestamp 0037. Agent Russo, we have reached the perimeter of the Throne District. The transition was immediate. The industrial architecture has vanished. We are looking at a plaza made of polished black stone. In the center, there's a structure. It's a palace. It's massive, at least 3 kilometers in height, reaching all the way up to the liquid ceiling. The top of the palace is actually touching the water above us. Agent Vance, lead, checking the log files from Expedition 11. There was no palace listed in the data. It was an open-air amphitheater 3 weeks ago. Agent Russo, the city gives him what he wants when he's strong. He wants a palace today. Weapons at low ready. Enter the main rotunda. The team crossed the threshold of the grand structure. The interior was cavernous, silent, and dripping with moisture. The walls were lined with towering statues of figures whose faces were worn away by water damage. At the far end of the hall, seated upon the wet stone throne, sat SCP-6803-2. Timestamp 0042. The team halted 20 meters from the base of the throne. The pale blue light from the entity's eyes illuminated the mist hanging in the air. SCP-6803-2, welcome back. Agent Russo, we've never met. SCP-6803-2, not in this version. A long, heavy silence fell over the room. The sound of water dripping from the entity's sleeves onto the stone floor was loud, rhythmic, and metallic. Agent Russo, who are you? SCP-6803-2, I am the king. Agent Russo, of this city. SCP-6803-2, of every city that has ever drowned. Agent Russo, that's not an answer. We need a designation, a historical origin, or an ontological baseline. King of drowned cities is a poetic evasion. SCP-6803-2, it is the only answer that matters. The entity raised a slow, waterlogged right arm and gestured toward a massive arched window on the western wall of the palace. The window did not look out onto the streets of the coastal metropolis the team had just traversed. Instead, it displayed a crystal-clear panoramic view of a completely different city skyline. It was a sprawling megacity of impossible, twisting ivory towers, golden bridges, and floating gardens, all completely submerged beneath a dark blue ocean, with massive leviathans swimming between the buildings. Foundation analysts later cross-referenced the layout with every known historical, anomalous, and fictional city in our database. The skyline belonged to no known location in our reality or any recorded timeline. Agent Russo pauses looking at the window. Are you a god? The drowned king leaned forward slightly. The organisms on his crown shifted, their tiny claws clicking against his temples. A faint, low vibration began to rattle the floorboards beneath the team's boots. SCP-6803-2, do you know the difference between a god and a king? Agent Russo, enlighten me. SCP-6803-2, a god is worshipped because it exists. A king exists because he is worshipped. At that exact moment, the telemetry data from the team began to degrade. The portable reality stability sensors carried by Agent Vance began to beep erratically, their digital displays flickering with nonsense characters. The cant counters registered a sudden, violent drop in local Hume levels, falling from a stable 1 down to a dangerously fluid 0.3. Agent Vance, lead, we're losing the anchor. The local reality density is collapsing. I've got an immediate high-grade migraine. My nose is bleeding. Agent Russo, hold your ground, Vance. Keep the sensors active. To SCP-6803-2, then what happens if nobody worships you? What happens if we empty your city, lock your gates, and leave you in the dark? The drowned king smiled. It was a slow, terrible expression that revealed teeth worn smooth and white like river pebbles. SCP-6803-2, why do you think I keep building cities? Timestamp end of transcript. At that precise second, a localized electromagnetic and thaumaturgic pulse erupted from the throne. All recording devices, radio transmitters, and biometric sensors carried by MTF Mu-13 experienced simultaneous catastrophic failure. The audio feed cuts to static. The video feed goes black. Site Command immediately ordered an emergency extraction operation, deploying a secondary tactical unit into the lake to recover the team. Of the 8 personnel who had stepped into the water 42 minutes prior, only 5 returned to the surface. Agent Russo, Agent Vance, and a third operative were missing. There were no signs of a struggle at the throne room site. The palace itself had vanished by the time the rescue team arrived, replaced by a flooded quarry. 3 months later, during a routine surveillance sweep of the city's residential sectors by a disguised reconnaissance drone, the 3 missing agents were located. They were living in a small, wood-frame house in a district that resembled a mid-century American suburb. They were dressed in civilian clothing. They were smiling. They were participating in a town council meeting, voting on the implementation of a new water distribution system for their neighborhood. When the drone attempted to establish contact through a localized audio speaker, utilizing their old Foundation call signs, all 3 individuals looked directly at the camera. They did not exhibit signs of distress, brainwashing, or psychological torture. They spoke clearly, calmly, and with absolute certainty. They denied ever having worked for the Foundation. They denied knowing what the letters SCP stood for. They stated, with a quiet, unshakable reverence, that they had lived in the city their entire lives, and that they were deeply grateful to the king for bringing them home. They had been overwritten. Their pasts, their loyalties, and their very identities had been dissolved in the fluid history of the drowned crown. Section 6. The Incident 6803 Delta Analysis. To fully comprehend the danger that SCP-6803 poses to the baseline reality of our planet, we must examine the formal after-action report of Incident 6803 Delta, which occurred in the late autumn of a previously redacted year. Prior to the incident, the Department of Tactical Theology and the Overview Council had grown increasingly alarmed by the steady growth of the city's population. The lake's lure had been unusually effective over the preceding 18 months, drawing in over 75,000 residents. Correspondingly, the drowned king's power had reached an unprecedented level. He had begun to manifest minor reality alterations outside the physical boundaries of the lake, causing water pipes in nearby civilian towns to burst and flow with salt water, and inducing brief, localized auditory hallucinations in individuals living up to 30 kilometers away. A decision was made at the highest levels of Foundation leadership. We could no longer maintain a passive containment posture. We had to test the hypothesis that population starvation could permanently neutralize the entity. Operation Dry Well was authorized. A massive task force consisting of 4 separate mobile units, supported by high-output Scranton reality anchors and a specialized thaumaturgic suppression grid, breached the lake and initiated a forced, large-scale evacuation of SCP-6803-1. The operation was initially a staggering tactical success. Utilizing advanced non-lethal dispersal agents, acoustic containment fields, and targeted localized amnesticants, our teams managed to round up and extract approximately 18,000 inhabitants from the city's outer districts over a 48-hour period. These individuals were loaded into specialized transport submersibles and brought to the surface, where they were immediately placed into high-security quarantine facilities for evaluation and long-term detoxification from the memetic signal. The immediate effect on the city and its ruler was profound, matching our mathematical models perfectly. Within 48 hours of the evacuation, the drowned king underwent a catastrophic physical collapse. He visibly aged several decades in a matter of hours. His flesh shrank against his bones, turning a pale, sickly gray. His eyes lost their brilliant blue luminescence, fading to a dull, milky film that resembled the eyes of a dead fish. The city itself began to die. Multiple peripheral districts, entire neighborhoods of Victorian houses and concrete industrial complexes, simply lost their structural integrity and dissolved into piles of wet sand and rotted timber. For the first time in recorded history, reports of starvation, disease, and poverty appeared among the remaining residents. The magical abundance of the city failed. The stone tables remained empty, and the floating lanterns flickered and died, plunging the streets into a cold, terrifying darkness. Most significantly, SCP-6803-2 lost his ability to alter reality. Our surveillance teams witnessed him trying to manifest a defensive wall to block a Foundation advance. He failed, vomiting a stream of black, brackish water onto the pavement before falling to his knees. He was observed walking through the ruins of his palace, leaning heavily on a stick, unable to teleport, unable to heal his own decaying body. We believed we were on the verge of a total neutralization. We believed that if we could extract another 10,000 residents, the false divinity would cease to exist. And then the trap sprung. As the king's internal power dropped below the critical 40% threshold, his unconscious survival mechanism activated with an intensity we had never anticipated. The influence radius phenomenon did not manifest as a gradual expansion. It was an explosive, violent decompression of his memetic field. The lake's signal expanded from its modest 12-kilometer baseline to an incredible 241 kilometers in less than an hour. The consequences were immediate and catastrophic. The regional quarantine facilities where we had housed the 18,000 extracted residents were completely overwhelmed. The subjects didn't become violent. They simply stood up in unison, broke through the secure glass perimeters, ignored the automated defense systems, and began walking back toward the lake. The security guards assigned to watch them, despite their standard counter-memetic training, fell under the expanded signal within minutes. They dropped their weapons, opened the secure gates, and joined the march. But it didn't stop with the quarantined subjects. The signal swept over 3 major civilian cities located within the 240-kilometer radius. 6 months following Incident 6803 Delta, the region surrounding the lake became a ghost zone. More than 31,000 civilians simply vanished into the mountains. They walked away from their lives in the middle of the day or the dead of night. Traffic jams stretched for miles along the mountain passes. Thousands of cars abandoned on the asphalt with their doors open, their engines running, and their drivers walking into the woods toward the water. Our containment teams were utterly helpless. Any personnel we sent into the exclusion zone without level 5 thaumaturgic shielding were immediately corrupted by the song, walking into the lake to join the workforce. We were forced to pull back our lines, establish a massive, automated outer perimeter at the 250-kilometer mark, and watch through satellite imagery as the Earth bled its population into the maw of the anomaly. Within those 6 months, the population levels of SCP-6803-1 did not just recover. They exploded, exceeding 90,000 residents. The recovery of SCP-6803-2 was immediate and terrifying. He didn't just regain his previously documented capabilities. He absorbed the collective energy of the 31,000 new residents and used it to fuel a massive surge in his ontological evolutionary path. He demonstrated several entirely new abilities that had never been observed prior to the incident. He developed the power to manipulate the local gravity within the Throne District, allowing him to walk up the sides of buildings or suspend objects in midair without utilizing thaumaturgic runes. He gained the ability to project his voice outside the boundaries of the lake even during daylight hours, inducing brief flashes of compliance in individuals living hundreds of kilometers away. His physical durability reached a point where a tactical cruise missile strike, launched by an authorized oversight directive against the lake's center during a period of high activity, failed to penetrate the surface water. Its kinetic and explosive energy simply absorbed and converted into an illumination display for the city below. The current consensus among the Foundation's predictive analytics models and our theological research divisions is deeply grim. SCP-6803-2's power ceiling has not yet been reached. There is no evidence to suggest that he has an upper limit. Section 7. The final projections of tactical theology. What is the ultimate nature of SCP-6803? Our current working hypothesis has discarded the idea that he is a traditional reality bender, a space-time anomaly, or a standard extra-dimensional entity. SCP-6803-2 is a self-sustaining, memetic parasitic sovereign. He is an ontological virus that has discovered how to utilize human belief, human focus, and human presence as a fuel source to manufacture a synthetic version of true divinity. He is building a kingdom, brick by brick, soul by soul, beneath the surface of our world. And he is doing it by exploiting the fundamental flaws of the human condition, our loneliness, our grief, our desire for a simpler past, and our fear of an uncertain future. He does not conquer us through force of arms. He conquers us by offering a home where the rules never change, where the dead come back to life, and where every citizen is granted exactly what they want at the cost of who they are. The Department of Tactical Theology has issued a final, stark warning regarding the long-term containment of this asset. If the population of SCP-6803-1 continues to grow at its current projected rate, if the king manages to draw in hundreds of thousands or millions of residents through a future expansion of his influence radius, the distinction between a false divinity and a true God will completely cease to exist. A God, from an ontological perspective, is an entity that possesses the power to define the baseline laws of reality across the entire cosmos. Right now, the drowned king can only define those laws within the infinite space of his city. But if his battery grows large enough, if his population reaches a critical mass, his field of influence will expand past the shores of the lake permanently. The liquid ceiling will become the sky. The non-Euclidean geometry of his city will become the geometry of our continents. The history of the surface world will be dissolved in the dark water of his memory, rewritten until we have always been his subjects, always lived beneath the waves, and always wore the waterlogged garments of his court. Should SCP-6803-1 ever achieve that critical population threshold, Foundation theologians estimate that SCP-6803-2 will eventually become completely indistinguishable from an actual, absolute God. And on that day, the baseline reality of humanity will drown forever beneath the weight of the drowned crown. This concludes the audio briefing for SCP-6803. You are now directed to report to your supervisor for physical screening and counter-memetic verification. Do not discuss the contents of this file with anyone. Do not look at the stars tonight. And above all, if you begin to hear the sound of distant music, or the voice of someone you lost calling you from the dark, do not look toward the water.